Well, if you will, go on ahead, open your Bibles to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel. There we go. Very quick recap last week. 2 Samuel chapter 1 opens, Saul and Jonathan are dead. And we had that Amalekite showed up, said, hey, I'm the guy that took out your enemy. And David said, I don't know who you think you are that you would dare to harm Saul, but this isn't going to go well for you, son. It goes so unwell for him that he commands one of the young men to go on ahead and put the man to death right then. There are times where the adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, is not even close to accurate. And as we said last week, sometimes there are some fights you just need to stay out of the middle of altogether, because the only reason there was so much negative passion between Saul and David was because there had been so much love. And those kinds of fights, you just, if you have any sense, you stay out of them. And so when that word comes and they have the confirmation and all that, David is anointed as a king, and he's anointed as a king to rule over Israel. That's what a Messiah is. So every time you see the word Christ, remember, Christ is not Jesus' last name. All right? So, no, his name was Jesus Christ. No, that's not his last name. Christ is the same word as Messiah, and Messiah means the king anointed to rule over Israel. He is God's divinely appointed, and I don't like to use the word vicar, but, he's God's divinely appointed substitute king. That's what it is. So in the person of Jesus Christ, as God manifest in the flesh and anointed as that role, a divine man rules as king in heaven and on earth over God's people. And then we touched on God's respect for, not God, but David's respect for Saul and Jonathan. And absolutely beautiful song. Absolutely beautiful song. And if you've never come up with 3 verses and a chorus in under 5 minutes that made sense, you might not be able to appreciate how gifted of a poet and a musician was David. He came up with this on the fly. And I know Ronnie, you've studied music. Come up with 3 or 4 verses and a refrain in under 20 minutes that makes sense. Most people can't do that.
I just went to a songwriting symposium or whatever you call it, when we were going a couple of weeks ago and talked to some people that write songs.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy job.
No. And so when you want to see, how gifted was David in that area, this is one of those kinds of proofs. And obviously they tear their clothes, aka they rend their garments in sorrow. And so when chapter 2 opens up, we begin with 7 years of civil war. And I want to remind everybody when people are like, well, Saul had to go for David to be king. That's true. But for how Saul went, the result was 7 years of civil war. And, when civil war occurs, and I always know people who have no political or military sense. When we were in boot camp, North Korea was heating up again. And our company commander, he said that he really hoped that something went really bad with the North Koreans so that we'd have a good excuse to go to war. And in my brilliant way, I accidentally said out loud, "Are you stupid?" You know you're not supposed to say that to company commanders when you're enlisted, right? And he got mad at me, and then he asked me the question. He said something about, are you a cow or are you a chicken? And I said, no. I said, but let's be very clear. I said, for 40 plus years, I said, they've trained for nothing but the next time we go to war. And I said, they don't have black flag days, or it's too hot, or it's too cold, or my shoelaces don't work. I said, they train no matter how good, no matter how bad, no matter how miserable, for one job, to kill everyone that comes who's American. And I said, with all due respect, sir, I said, our training ain't tough enough to go against the Koreans. And you say, how well did that go? Then, fortunately, my drill instructor came over and said, Reagan, shut up and leave. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, what does that have to do with Civil War? Over the last 20 years, the number of times the idea of Civil War has been brought up in public discussion in America, and that people have not really thought this thing through. If you thought COVID made life miserable, let a little Civil War break out, and you'll think COVID was nothing but good times. So it was just 7 years of Civil War, Brother Brian. Civil War takes centuries to undo. Centuries. Okay? We're 160 years come this April 9th. 160 years of Lee surrendering the Army of Northern Virginia to Grant. Who understands? We're not even close to being healed as a nation. Okay? So 7 years Civil War, this is bad. And when Solomon dies, guess what? The fracture that was there, that was already here, will break again, and it will never heal for the rest of the time of Israel and Judah. So this 7 years Civil War was a very, very bad thing, very destructive. And so chapter 2 takes us into a tale of two kings. It was the worst of times, and it was even worse times. So if you're a Dickens fan, you understand the humor of that. But if I get someone to read verses 1 through 7 of 2 Samuel chapter 2.
Then it came about afterwards that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to one of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. So David said, where shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam and this was whatever, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And David brought up these men who were with him, each with his household, and they lived in the cities of Hebron. Then the men of Judah came, and there anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed of the Lord, because you have shown this kindness to Saul your Lord, and have buried him. Now may the Lord show loving kindness and truth to you, and I also will show this goodness to you, because you have done this thing. Now therefore, let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them.
All right. Then you say, but David's king. Who knows what the last number that we had for what David's army numbered? And we had it back there with Nabal the Carmelite. 600. Okay. Now 600 guys was the wrong thing for Nabal to contend with. Okay. But Saul has a standing army of thousands and thousands. So David is still at a little bit of a disadvantage. Benjamin is located basically in the middle of Judah. So there's a lot of things going on here. But notice again, David shows respect to those who showed respect to Saul. And so, most of the time, David exercises decorum and discretion. Most of the time. And very seldom, Ronnie, when people talk about David being a man after God's own heart, almost never do they talk about David's sense of decorum. You know, when your enemy falls, you can still treat him with respect. You can still show basic courtesy. And I point that out now because we're going to see in a minute where David shows decorum and discretion, but in a little bit David's not going to show any discretion. And it's going to make things much, much worse. But this is where he's anointed king over Judah. David is not king over Israel united for 40 years. He's king over Israel united for 33 and a half. And,
Give us a brief description of what happened to, how did Israel get divided, how did they get divided, very quickly. Because I'm trying to refresh my mind about how it got divided.
So, you remember when we were going through the life of Joseph, and we took the time on those prophecies? Judah had this amazing prophecy, but so did Joseph and Ephraim. Even coming into the promised land under Joshua, Ephraim was the dominant tribe of the north, Judah was the dominant tribe of the south. They both had the numbers and they both had the politics. And if you go back in American history, this would be like the battle that went on back and forth between New York and Virginia in the late 17 and early 1800s. You know, everything south of Virginia rallied around Virginia. Everything north of Virginia pretty much rallied around New York. And it comes down to numbers, economics, and political influence. And so this divide, because of the size of Ephraim and also Manasseh, his brother, and then Judah, that he's got all these cool prophecies, and so does Ephraim, the people just kind of start splitting that way, even within the lifetime of Joshua.
So when David first became king, he was basically king over Judah, right?
Yes, just over Judah. And I'm going to say it this way, and don't anybody go, Brian's whatever. Imagine if, when Lincoln got assassinated, if they would have vaulted Jeff Davis as the new president of the United States. What would that have done? For those who know their history. That would have been crazy, right? You have to understand, sociologically, David being anointed king, and you said, but he was picked by God. Take God out of the equation. We're just talking about human feelings and human politics. Take God out of the equation, throwing David up there after Saul's untimely demise would have been like putting Jeff Davis as the new head of the country after Lincoln's assassination. It was not a thing that the country wanted to swallow.
Jefferson Davis was the
president of the Confederacy. Yeah. And so, you know, and some people are going to watch, no, it's not the same. We don't have anything in our nation's history that even really comes close to this. That would be the closest you could come. The only other thing that you could say would be to say, you know, that Douglas, that Lincoln had all the famous debates with, that on Lincoln's assassination they put him in as president instead of Johnson, you know. So, but yeah, imagine the enemy of the dominant people, that their leader is now being proclaimed the king and the chosen one. This is a bitter pill. This is a very bitter pill. And y'all understand when I say take God out of the equation? Everybody is always like, but God picked him. Who understands, just because God picked you doesn't mean anybody necessarily is going to like you. True or false? God picked Moses. I count at least 5 times they tried to overthrow Moses and kill him. Okay? You say, it didn't work for him. Well, yeah. It didn't work, but it doesn't change the fact he was God's picked, and they didn't want him. You know? And so, because why? People are people. Not everybody's like, oh, well, you're God's anointed. You're just the most wonderful thing ever. Because who's the ultimate standard of God's anointed? Come on, this isn't a trick question. Someone give me the answer we teach all the children in Bible class. Jesus. Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right? A kid in Bible class gets it. Jesus. Yeah. Jesus is the ultimate God's anointed. And here's how much the people loved him. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Yeah. That was their chant, that Friday morning. Okay? And this was after he did miracles for what? At least 250,000 people. Just because God picked you doesn't mean anybody wants you. You say, yeah, Brian, and I bet you felt that way in churches too, ain't you? Yeah, probably have. I don't know. You say, are you comparing yourself to Jesus? Only because he lets me have his name. That's it. All right. You got your reading on, Michelle?
Yes, sir.
All right. Go on ahead and grab 8 through 11.
But Abner the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth the son of Saul and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, over all of Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months.
All right. Ishbosheth is born when Saul began to be king. David and Ishbosheth are very, very close age-wise. Ishbosheth, I promise you, he never planned on being king. Okay. Current King of England, Chuck. Next in line, William. Then their kids. Then Harry. Then their kid. Then Andrew. Nobody wants Andrew. Right? That's how far down the line Ishbosheth really is. Everybody else of all the sons, what? They got killed with Saul, and that's when Saul killed himself. All of the other sons that would have been the next in line, they're all dead. So Abner anoints him as king. He's a general. He anoints as king. This is a big deal. Kings who betray their generals usually don't do well as kings. The army, as time goes on and a king becomes more kingly and spends less time with his men in the field, the men shift their loyalties to the generals. And so if you're a smart king, you're loyal to your generals, because the general takes the army away from you. And that's going to play here in just a second. All right? He is a short-term big dog. 2 years. Okay? Not too long. 12 through 17, if someone will read that. What happens with this will take 40 years to settle. Go ahead, someone read me 12 through 17.
Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon, and Joab the son of Zeruiah and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. They sat down, one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise."
All right, now pause. Abner and Joab, this is like a 3-star and 4-star general having to check. And they said, you know what, let's pick our best corporals, and let's just let them brawl it out in the middle of the field. And the other one says, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Sounds like a great idea. All right, keep going.
Then they arose and passed over by number, 12 for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword through his opponent's side, so they fell down together. Therefore, that place was called Elkiah Hazaroth, which is at Gibeon. And the battle was very fierce that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David.
All right. So yeah, the field of sharp swords. He said, are you kidding me? They all ran up, grabbed each other's beards, and stabbed each other, and they all fell dead? Yes. You need to have some defense when you go to a showdown like this. But they said, how could they be that way? They've been chasing each other in the field, waiting for the chance to fight for years. Bloodlust overcomes their common sense when they finally get to duke it out. This is why, there are certain things when you're in a place of anger, man, just don't even cross that bridge, okay? 18 through 28, I'll grab it. It says, now the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. And Asahel was fleet of foot like a wild gazelle. Translation, Usain Bolt was slow compared to him. He's fast, super fast. And Abner looked behind him. So Asahel pursued Abner, and in going, he did not turn to the right hand or the left from following Abner. Now Abner is pretty fast too. And Abner looked behind him and said, are you Asahel? And he said, I am. And Abner said to him, turn aside to your right or your left, and lay hold of one of the young men and take his armor for yourself. But Asahel would not turn aside from following. Now let me translate that for you. Dude, leave me alone and score some of the bounty from one of the dead guys and just go back. Abner is asking him, please, let's you and me not fight today. You're looking for some signs that you're a bad dude on the battlefield, take someone else's armor and hold it up as your trophy. And so Abner again said to Asahel, turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I face your brother Joab? And he said, wait a second, you say these have been enemies. Right, but before they were enemies, what? Joab was in the same army under Abner. And Joab's like one of the toughest dudes ever on pages of Scripture. Okay? And Abner knows it. And he knows this, if something goes down between Joab's brother and him, it's going to create strife. However, he refused to turn aside, therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the blunt end of the spear, so the spear came out of his back, and he fell down and died there on the spot. And so it was, as they came to the place where Asahel fell down and died, they stood still. And Joab and Abishai also pursued Abner. And the sun was going down when they came to the hill of Ammah, which is before Giah by the road, by the wilderness of Gibeon. And now the children of Benjamin gathered together behind Abner and became a unit, and took their stand on top of the hill. And Abner called out to Joab and said, shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that it would be bitter in the latter end? How long then will it be until you tell the people to return from pursuing their brethren? This is Abner saying, let's pause for today on killing each other. He says, man, this doesn't go anywhere good. And you say, but a few verses before they said, hey, let's have a dozen guys come out and just duke it out. And whatever in Abner, and honestly, I think killing Asahel is that moment where he's like, if we don't hit the pause button today, this thing is going to devour everyone. Sometimes you start something, and it's not over until everything is dead. And if you're a student of military history, you know this. There are too many stories where it starts, and when it's done, no one walks away, and there's 100,000 laying in the field, all dead. And in Afghanistan, with the Russians, back in the late 70s and early 80s, there was an entire valley that was filled with nothing but Russian dead, as far as the eye could see. And so, I don't say that to be macabre or grotesque, just this kind of thing, it's not just a Bible thing. So when people go, that was Bible times, brother. It still happens today. And you have what? And understand, I'm not picking a side, but I mean, seriously. You know, they had peace for what? A few weeks? And now they're back at it in Israel and Gaza? You know? If you don't stop, ain't nothing going to be left. And so the principles are still valid. And so Joab said, verse 27, as God lives, unless you had spoken, surely then by morning all the people would have given up pursuing their brethren. So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the people stood still and did not pursue Israel anymore, nor did they fight anymore. This blood feud will carry on. And so we move into chapter 3, and I've got this up here, Davidic wisdom or lack thereof. And remember what I said, and the slide is true.
Ishbosheth is king over Israel. Abner is Ishbosheth's general. David's king over Judah. Joab is David's general.
This is going to play, and it takes 40 years to finish playing out. So if I get someone to read 8 through 12. 8 through 12.
But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishabeth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Manahem. And he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David.
I'm sorry, did I say chapter 2? I'm sorry, sister, I meant to say chapter 3. That's my fault.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm the one who said chapter 2. No, I meant chapter 3, verse 8. Well, I know, but I said it wrong. So, let me own it's my mistake. Chapter 3. Samuel 3, 8 through 12.
I'm sorry.
No. Sister, there's nothing for you to apologize for. I said it wrong.
Same names in it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's 3, start with verse 8.
Verse 8, yes, ma'am.
When Abner became very angry at the words of Ishbosheth and said, Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I show loyalty to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hand of David. And you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman. May God do so to Abner, and more also, if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba. And he could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David, saying, Whose is the land? Saying also, Make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you.
All right. So Abner and Ishbosheth, they've got a little bit of disagreement. Abner wanted one of Saul's concubines. Ishbosheth says, Who do you think you are? And Abner says, I'm the guy who's keeping you in power. Who do you think you are? He says, I tell you what, you don't want to cut me in on any of the kingdom? That's fine. I'll take the whole kingdom straight to David. And you'll be done, son. And it said what? Ishbosheth was afraid to say anything because he was terrified. And rightly so. You know.
So this is where they combine the kingdoms?
This is where the kingdoms kind of come together, yes, sir. And I say kind of. Because go on ahead and read, I'll catch 13 through 16, and someone else will get ready for 17 through 21. And David said, Good, I'll make a covenant with you, but one thing I require of you, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. What had happened here was Michal stayed in the royal palace when David fled, and to punish David, Saul traded his daughter out to a different man and took her away from her husband. And David's thing is, and so, well, why would David want her back? Okay, if you understand kingdoms, you can't have the sole surviving daughter of a king who used to be your wife, that by wrong means was sent somewhere else, still alive, because anybody loyal to her father and his house, when she has her next kid, that will be the one that they'll try to exalt, and you'll be back in the situation of civil war. You have to get the houses under control. You have to. Okay? And so him wanting Michael back is twofold. She's his wife, his first wife, number one, and number two, he can't have the daughter of the king out there having kids somewhere else and not under his kingdom. All right. So someone read 17 through 21, then, please.
Now Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, in time past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Now then, do it, for the Lord has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people in Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. Then Abner also went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron all that seemed good to Israel and the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Then Abner said to David, I will arise and go and gather all Israel to the Lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace.
All right. Now, how many of you thinking, all right, man, David's a pretty sharp guy. Make a deal with Abner, bring all of the other tribes, bring the army, everything will be under David. This is a good deal. And if it would have stopped there, it would have been just fine. But the fact he threw a feast for him and cut a covenant with him. 22 through 27.
Just then the servants of David arrived with Joab from the raid, bringing much spoil with them.
All right, now pause. Who was not there for this party? No. What name did you just read?
Sorry, David.
No. And the servants of David and Joab just came in from a raid. Who wasn't at the party? Joab. Who understands it's bad business to cut a deal with the other general when your number one general is not in the room? This is bad business, especially when he's out doing your business as a king. Okay? Keep reading, Phyllis.
But Abner was not with David at Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. And when Joab and all the army that was with him came, it was told to Joab, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has let him go, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it you have sent him away, so that he is gone? You know that Abner the son of Ner came to deceive you, and to know your goings out and your comings in, and to know all that you are doing. Keep reading. Okay. When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back to the cistern at Sirah. But David did not know about it. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the midst of the gate to speak with him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother.
All right. Stay with the one who brought you. This was just bad business. You say, well, you know, David had cut a deal and shoved Joab out the door. This was bad business. And David can say he and all of his house are guiltless.
But they're not.
and I've had a lot of people argue with me on this over the years. Who's eat dirt with David for a decade? Who's gone through all the hard times with David for a decade? This was a total betrayal of David against all of his men who'd been faithful to him for a decade. And, and there's one other extremely notable time in history. And if you're familiar with Mark Antony and Octavian Augustus, Mark Antony decided he liked Julius Caesar's girlfriend in Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra. And they're at a battle, a naval battle, and Mark Antony is on Cleopatra's boat, her ship, and she says, you know what? They can finish the fight. Let's go on ahead and sail away. It'll all work out. It didn't work out. And the general left his men. So they get back down into Africa, and Augustus is there with all of his armies, with his legions. And Mark Antony, all of his men come back to him. He said, well, brother, that sounds like a story that's working out great. Now, if you know your history, you know how this plays out. When they made camp for the night, all of his men snuck away at night and went over to Augustus. And when Mark Antony awoke, the only man in his camp was him. Because he left his men on the field of battle, even if it was a naval battle. All of his men left him. And David cutting a deal with the opposite side when his general's not there was the highest form of disrespect he could have done. And for what I call the David defenders, the ones who think David can do nothing wrong except the three things, no, this was a big deal. When David is dying, David will tell Solomon, make sure you have Benaiah kill Joab, because he killed Abner. 40 years this thing will play out. 40 years. And here's what you know. Did Joab have a certain degree of blood right over his brother? Yeah, technically. Technically he did. Okay. Joab is so committed to David's throne, if David would have put them both in the same room, he could have given orders to both of them and held both pieces together. And so definitely some interesting stuff. Definitely some interesting stuff. We'll pick up a little bit more next week. But what's the other lesson for us in this as applies to our world today? Can we agree David's had some great moments where he's been absolutely brilliant?
Yes.
Has he also had some moments where he's been terrible?
Yes.
The day that people figure out the President of the United States doesn't even have as much divine guidance as David, don't be as hard on him when he messes up, and don't think that, God is, made him the greatest thing since sliced bread just because he gets a couple things right. If you're patient with David, be patient with the people who lead your own country.
Well, it also says, to say it's true that David, as well as the other kings, done what the Lord said to destroy them all,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have this problem.
No, they wouldn't have. No, they wouldn't have. Yeah, that's one of those fun lessons. 70% obedience is still 100% disobedience. What's up, Nick? What'd you make? I like it. All right, 909. 909. We do have quite a few kids with Tonight is the last night of the hog shows. The pigs, hogs, I don't know what they call it, but. What? What'd you say, the swine show? Okay. You like ham? You like bacon? Is that what your boy said? Yes. A pig is a magical animal. You can get pork chops, ham, bacon, pork loin, sausage. I mean, it's my firm belief, boys. God did not let Israel eat pork because if he would have, they would have made golden statues to it everywhere and they would have worshipped the pig. Only us Gentiles can handle it. And then you add in pork skins. And then ham hocks with your greens and beans. Yeah, I mean, yeah, pigs are like one of the greatest animals ever. So 9:09, there's a fountain free. What do we have announcement-wise? Yes, Sunday evening singing out at Midway. What else do we have? So 9:09, there's fountain free. We'll do first and last verse. Other than knowing the ceasefire thing got broke, I have absolutely no idea what's happening in current events for the last week and a half. Apparently there's some storms out west. I was told that.
Well, I thank you for the hesitation. I also want to thank everybody in this congregation for their prayers for my last week and a half. Thank you.
George had the kidney surgery back on the 10th, and they got him kind of squared away, and and we're glad to see you tonight, George. Glad to have you back. Good.
Heather and Ethan are doing much better.
Heather and Ethan are doing much better. Good, good. One of the great benefits of studying the Old Testament is it should allow us to put our current world into a proper framework. Things are things. Politics never change. It just really doesn't. But the other great lesson in Romans 15 says it to us this way. It says the things that were previously written were written so we could learn, and through the patience and the comfort of the Scripture would have hope. And so as we go through these lessons, I want to say to you, figure out as we're going through them, in what can you have patience, in what can you derive comfort from these other lessons. And the life of David tells me one big thing. David got a lot of things right, and David got a lot of things wrong, but David kept coming back to the Lord. And I want to say to you, maybe you're here tonight, and maybe you've been on the roller coaster of right, wrong, on track, off track. You say, if I'm on a roller coaster and I'm off track, yeah, there you go, you got big problems. The Lord would have extended mercy to Saul if he ever would have sought it by repentance. As we're in this time where people are starting to think more and more about the crucifixion of our Lord, I think about Judas and I think about Peter. They were both betrayers and liars. And one came back and said, I'm sorry. And the other went out and died in his own grief. And if you're here tonight and you have it in your head, you say, Brian, I've done too much, you don't know. You're right, I don't know and I don't need to know. But I know this, when our Lord took all of the sins and bore them in his own body on the tree, he knows And before we were ever born, before Florida was ever called Florida, before the English language even existed, he had already paid that price.